narrative, and I think to me it's so sort of problematic and sort of ironic that everybody wants to be Black and everybody loves Black culture and everybody, wants to have cornrows and everybody wants to rap, but nobody actually wants to be there for Black folks and be there for the Black community. And to me, I find that very particular. That's a global issue, I would say. I gave that same workshop in South Korea, and that was an issue there too, because anti-Blackness is a global phenomenon. But I think especially in Vancouver, where there's that huge disconnect between having such a small Black population, also Vancouver being like a slightly apathetic place, and kind of the combination of those things, I think, is what leads to a lack of critical investigation into folks' complicity in anti-Blackness, and a lack of meaningful relationships with Black folks, leading people to make judgments or to form very surface level relationships with Black people, but not truly understand the nuance and complexity of a community. So that's kind of something that's important to me, that kind of unpacking those stereotypes. And I think especially for myself, as a non-binary person, I personally experience a very stringent way that gender is placed on me, and I think it's because of how Black women are portrayed in the media, and there's kind of a very specific expectation of how I should exist and how I should show up and how people can treat me, because they view me as a woman, even though I don't identify that way. And I think, it's just so complex, and I think if we don't have those conversations about the nuance and complexity of Blackness and the Black experience, especially in Vancouver, we miss a lot of pieces, and I think that's how anti-Blackness is kind of, manages to stay alive and strong here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Handel Wright, and folks have been introducing themselves, but I'm sometimes reluctant to introduce my Blackness because it's in some ways, it might be embarrassing for people who are Black here, and maybe embarrassing for me because my folks are descended from the Black people who were Black loyalists and went to Nova Scotia. And my folks are the folks who chose to go back to Africa. So it's kind of embarrassing for those people who chose to stay. And it's embarrassing for me because I chose to come back. So I wear several hats here. That's something of an introduction. I'm a professor of educational studies. I'm co-director of the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education. And all of these are related to Shelby's incident. Right? I'm part of the Black Caucus at UBC, and I'm a founding member of the Black Canadian Studies Association, the association that Shelby came to present at. What some people might not know is that the BCSA started off having our separate conference. We had nothing to do with Congress, and it was a wonderful space where Black academics could get together, argue, speak with one another. And then we came up with the bright idea of joining Congress. And the result was this. This is how one of our members was treated. But I want to say something about, people have mentioned anti-Black racism. What happened to Shelby is rather unusual, that kind of blatant, dramatic anti-Black racism, which happens, but it's not the way it works in academia. I want to get to academia specifically. In academia, anti-Black racism is usually subtle, right? It's much more insidious. Somebody put it this way. It's racism that appears to melt into thin air even as it permeates everywhere, right? So I am the Black professor, and as the Black professor, I call myself the unexpected professor. So I'm greeted sometimes in the first class with the raised eyebrow. Oh, that's the professor. The slight hesitation, right? The walking into a room where you fully expect no one else will look like you, where you're not mentored for leadership, right? So institutions, I want to speak to institutions. and the difficulty of addressing anti-black racism. We are, in the university, black faces in white spaces. Some of you might know that phrase. That's nowhere truer than it is in the academy. The university was not meant for women, for indigenous folks, for black folks. So we're constantly trying to make the university become a place where everybody can belong. So the Federation of Humanities and Social Sciences attempted first to address this and got it wrong. UBC itself tried to address this incident and got it wrong, and both needed to revise what they had done. And why did they end up doing that? The labor of black folks. So it took Shelby's own intervention. So the person who's actually the victim ends up trying to educate institutions. So this is the kind of double work that we end up doing, right? So when the person is black and in the university, what are the characteristics and what is the expectations? The expectation is that you might be grateful for being in the academy and so be apolitical and quiet. Not speak up against racism. Or the expectation is when they encounter you, you're going to be particularly radical and confrontational, especially black women for some reason. They're particularly radical. And black male academics are particularly misogynist, of course, and homophobic, just by virtue of being black. And if the institution wants to make change, it'll do so incrementally, and we have to do a lot of the work. And as we do that work, we should be very aware of sensitivity and white fragility. So I want to ask some questions. What about black knowledge? What about black ways of knowing? What about knowledge and concepts that are African and that connect the continent to Canada as part of an African diaspora? At a place like UBC, I'm asking, at Canadian universities in general. Where's our African studies? Where's our black Canadian studies? Where's our black studies? They're all heavily marginalized and erased, because the way that anti-black racism works, especially here, is a mixture of erasure and hypervisibility. So you're erased, you don't exist. And when, you do exist, then you must be a problem that needs to be addressed. So, and I worry about the fact, even as I celebrate the fact that we have Dr. Ainsley here, because the other way that anti-black racism works is by tokenism. So I'm watching to make sure that he doesn't happen to become our black token person in leadership at UBC. I want to say, finally, turn to black people ourselves, that we're not just victims and we're not just part of the activism, part of the solutions. Sometimes we are actively part of the problem because there are schisms and differences within blackness, even here. So it is hard to build community, given our low numbers and the fact that we do not have black neighborhoods. Vancouver is a really interesting place where you don't have black neighborhoods like other major cities in Canada. So with online sites like Meanwhile Black in Vancouver, this is where we make community. And I want to end up not with myself, but a statement from somebody who maybe doesn't even need a last name. She might still be here, and that's Kona. Recently, on the 4th of January, there was an argument about certain issues, and Kona wrote up something that she thought was very offhand, and I thought was just very profound, and I want to end by quoting her. She said, we have to live in this city together. The population of BC is 5 million people. The population of Metro Vancouver is 2.5 million people. The population of Vancouver is 675,000 people. We, black people, are 46,000 people in the whole province. We are 30,000 people in Metro Vancouver. BC Place in downtown Vancouver holds 54,500 people. We cannot afford to hurt each other. We must ensure that each one of us survives. thrives. Thank you.
Audre Lorde, in her book Sister Outsider, says, "The white fathers or the white masters told us, I think, therefore I am. But the black mothers in each of us whispers, I feel, therefore I can be free." My name is Shelby Ashley Emmanuel McPhee, and I am from the Bahamas, so I am Bahamian. I give you my full name because that's the name my mother gave me when the doctor gave her to me at birth. For years, I have been ashamed living in the Bahamas with two quote-unquote feminine names. But after years of work, after years of coming to grips with it, I can now give my full name. And so I make it a point every time I speak to give my full name. I am a recent graduate of Acadia University, so I'm an Axeman. I studied political science. My research, or my thesis, covered white women's roles in colonialism, and it was titled Saved by Grace, Toward an Interdisciplinary Understanding of the White Savior Complex Through the Lens of Race and Gender. It examined how white women in the colonialism era broke into, if I can put it that way, colonialism, or the colonial project. A lot of times when we read history, we find that the writers or the historians said that the colonial project held no space for white women. Well, that was not true. White women found a way to break into the colonial project and act as not only saviors of the quote-unquote barbarians or the native peoples, but saviors of white men. They broke into the colonial project trying to save white men from sleeping with brown women, trying to keep white men to be the colonial that they were trained to be, and to protect white men. And I say all of that to say that last year, in June, I was accused by a white woman of stealing a laptop. And this white woman who accused me of stealing this laptop, one, did not go to Congress. She was not a registered member. Two, she was the partner of the gentleman that was with her. And three, get this, the laptop didn't belong to her. Last year, on my way to Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences to present at the BCSA, I met a person on the plane. I will call them S. And after meeting S told me that they would be presenting at the very same conference, and that they were coming from Toronto, and that they didn't have a place to stay, and that they didn't have anywhere to go. And so I had an Airbnb, and I was driving, and so I told S, you can stay with me. S is white. And so my newfound colleague and I, S, we came to UBC, drove to UBC after a very long plane ride, and just stick a pin right there. I see why I don't come to Vancouver a lot, because it is a long flight from the Bahamas. It is long, like 7+ hours. And so after a long flight, S and I drove to UBC's campus. Getting on the campus, we realized that we would be presenting the same day. We realized that we would be presenting in the same building. And we realized that we would be presenting at the same time. This is all a part of the public domain. And so this is not something that I made up. This is the truth. And so S and I also realized that both of us had not finished our presentation. And so both of us decided to sit after registering for the conference, sit outside of the nest. And by the way, the AMS nest is just awesome. Like, I wish Acadia had an AMS nest. Like, all we have is a library. Nonetheless, we sat out front of the AMS nest after registering, and there was a man who was praying. I remember it. There was a man who was praying with his baby in a stroller. There was a woman at the table eating her lunch, because I had turned to her and asked her where did she get her wrap from. There was S sitting across from me, and so S was facing the front of the building, the front of the nest. S could see the front of the nest, and I could see in the opposite direction of the nest. And then on the side of S, there was the one conference attendee and his partner. After about 5 minutes sitting down, S and I decided that we were hungry, so that we would go and find food. So S got up from the table, because S was sitting right next to the two people, and asked them, "Excuse me, I need to get out." Very, in a, I don't know, kind of white solidarity way. They nod and something, we bump fists, but they did something, I don't know. And from there, they walked out. And S and I walked into the nest. We got something to eat. We left after eating, walked to the Buchanan building where we would be presenting, went to the floors that we would be presenting on. I saw their room, they saw my room. We decided that it would be time to go home and rest and come back prepared fully. As we were leaving, I was standing on, if you're headed out, I don't know how to describe it, but I was standing on the inner side. If this is the nest, I was standing on the inner side, and S was standing next to me. And as we were leaving, passing the nest, and the white woman is sitting down, and she's talking on the phone, and her partner's on the side of her, and she says, "And the two gentlemen that were sitting on the side of us earlier that day, they're passing us now." And this is the funny part, because as I'm leaving with S, I'm telling S, I stop S, and I said, "I think they're talking about us." And S says, "No, I don't think so." And this is interesting, because it is not until the third try that S actually turns around and believes me, right? It is interesting because after coming to Canada, learning that I was Black, and then learning that I was a minority after coming to Canada, and then I had to do something that Ta-Nehisi Coates calls in his book, Between the World and Me, adopt a kind of culture of the streets, if you may say, or as we know it, as becoming hypervigilant. I had to become quite hypervigilant to look at the stairs, learn the way people are looking at me, how they're looking at me, who's looking at me, and why they're looking at me. And after the first try, I told S, "I think they're talking about us." S didn't believe me. The second try, I told S. I turned around, again, in my hypervigilance, and saw that the guy that was sitting on the side of the woman had got up and started to follow us. S turned around and said, "I don't think so." As we're moving away on the third try, the guy, in all of his, unscrupulous, trying to be undercover, hides behind a tent and some trees, and is like taking a picture. First of all, he's not using an iPhone. He's using an Android. And then his Android has like a flap, so it's like hanging, and I'm like, "What? Dude." And so he's taking this picture of us, and I tap S and I say, "No, they are actually following us now." And then S finally believed me, and me, in all of my confrontational ways, me being Bahamian, me being Black, all of my Bahamianness came out of me. And in my native language, we would say, "Boy, I ain't never scared." I turned around and I walked to him and I said, "Is there a problem? You are following us. What is the issue?" And he denied. And I started to get very, very loud. And I want to say here, never tell someone that is already loud to calm down. Because never in history has telling someone calm down calmed them down. And so they're telling me to calm down, and I'm very passionate, I'm very vocal, and I'm like, no, this is wrong, you're following us, you're taking a picture of us. And then his protector comes over, his white savior, his partner comes over, and she says, we recognize him, pointing at S, who is non-binary. We recognize S, but we don't recognize you. Are you registered for this conference? And I'm like, first of all, S doesn't have on any conference material. He has not a bag. He has not a tag. He has nothing. They have nothing. Sorry about that. They have nothing to present them as a community member. I'm the one that's like a geek, like a freak for this conference. I've got on the dog tag. I've got the bag in my hand. I've got the pamphlet. The only thing I needed was a sign to say, I'm a speaker here. And they look at me and they said, we recognize him from earlier that day. Are you registered for this conference? And I said, first of all, that's none of your business whether or not I'm registered for this conference, but why are you asking me that? Well, our laptop was stolen earlier that day and you don't look like you belong here. And so, again, I got very passionate about it and I said, you're a racist, and we're going back and forth. And then the volunteer, came over and said, we've called campus security. Campus security sends a message to the volunteer and says, we're not coming, we've turned this over to the RCMP. And then campus security does still show up. And they show up and they go immediately to, at that time, everyone was calling the complainant. I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong. The complainant, is that how we pronounce it? Anyway, the complainant, yes. And no one's focusing on the next side. And then after campus security starts talking to the white woman who's giving her side of the story, the RCMP shows up. And the RCMP, because campus security has already allowed this woman to control the narrative, the RCMP goes to her as well. After speaking to this woman, the RCMP comes to me and asks me to provide ID. I said, I have my driver's license. I can provide you with my passport, which I had on me, and I can also provide you with my Acadia student ID. Those are 3 pieces of identification, but I think that would still not be enough to prove to you that I am actually a member of this conference. And so he takes the ID, he looks at them, and then he hands them back to me, and then S says, do you want to search us for this laptop? The RCMP searches S's bag, and then the RCMP declines to search mine, goes over to the car, comes back and says, yeah, this is just obviously some quote-unquote misunderstanding, and then they're off the scene. The interesting part, though, and this is the part that I have brought up several times in all of my interviews, was that when the Congress member came downstairs, again, the Congress member didn't come to me. The Congress member went to the white woman. So on 3 instances, this white woman had the opportunity to control this narrative. It is interesting when we go through this entire process of deconstructing this story, it is interesting to remember that we can look at this story from 3 ways. We can look at it from prejudice, discrimination, and racism. And Robin DiAngelo in her book, White Fragility, points this out and kind of cuts this up very, very interestingly. She says that prejudice is this thing that we are socialized into, that none of us, black, white, Hispanic, we cannot escape prejudice. These are the messages that we hear on the radio. These are the messages that we grow up with. Discrimination, she considers the act after prejudice, based on prejudice. Then we go into racism. Based on this story, it is very important for us to not only look at the individual acts of racism, but look at racism from this macro level. And this is not to say that racism from a macro level is worse than racism from a minor level. They're all dangerous. Ta-Nehisi Coates says that racism is a visceral experience. It is dangerous for Black people. But it is important to look at racism from this societal, systemic, institutional, omnipresent, epistemological thing that pervades our society and pervades our reality all the time. And when we look at racism from this level, we can see how in the aftermath of this entire thing, racism and the system of racism continue to uphold this woman's whiteness as superior, this woman's position as superior. We see how the system of racism not only protected her and continues to protect her and the man's anonymity, but how the system of racism in the aftermath made her complaint factual and mine an alleged thing. And so it is very, very important for us to look at it from that perspective. And as a caveat to all of that, and as we go through stories some more, I think it is very important that we don't look at racism, individual acts of racism, from this racist, non-good, or non-racist, good perspective or binary, with being a racist bad, not being a racist good, because what ends up happening is we try to absolve ourselves and say, well, if I'm not doing that, then obviously I'm not a racist. Don't look at that, don't take it from that perspective tonight as we go through this panel. I want to charge every white colleague in the room tonight to look at it from the perspective and ask yourself more constructive questions like, what can I possibly do, or what more can I be doing to interrupt anti-Black racism? What more can I be doing to interrupt acts and individual acts and systemic acts of racism? And it is here that I want to publicly acknowledge a woman who bravely saw me being targeted by the police, saw me being harassed by the police, saw me being harassed by these Congress attendees, and came in and said, I see a Black man being a target and I want to bear witness. I want to be there to speak up if I have to. And I don't know if she's in the room tonight, and I don't know if she's watching, I don't know if she's going to see this, but I want to tell you thank you. I want to say thank you. And I don't only want to say thank you to you, I want to say thank you to S. Because it comes right back down to this fact that the tale of Blackness, or the story from the Black perspective, is just not enough. We need someone to corroborate our experience, and that someone always has to be a white body.
I'm emotional. This evening is that kind of evening. But as a child growing up in the Deep South, Georgia to be exact, from that time till now, I've spent my life fighting to prove that I do not need, and we do not need, white people to prove that we are honest, good, and fair. And I do not, while I understand the elements of allyship and partnership and standing up and doing one's duty, I don't want to continue to perpetuate that sense that I need a white voice to save me. I want to challenge that. And I know different people have different approaches. My approach is to the demonstration of allyship, it seems to me, is being willing to take on crap and standing up for what is right because it is right, not because you're my savior. So.
Shelby, thank you so much. Can people hear me? No? How about now? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that story and the statements made by everyone. One thing that jumps to me as everybody was sharing their experiences, this idea of not belonging and how different features of our blackness are used as a signal for we don't belong here, you don't belong here. Even if you are several generation black, you still get asked, where are you from? But sometimes the asking is through the action of the RCMP investigating if you're radicalizing students, or to random individuals asking for you to prove your identity. Even when the facts are right there in front of them, you look, as you say, geeked out, very excited, but irrespective of the facts, there's something miraculous or magical. What happens when, how is it possible for when facts are presented in front of you, but it's still transformed in the imagination as something else than what it is? I find that aspect of your story fascinating. What explains that? How is it that you can be the gentlest person, you can, through your action, you're simply just a teacher, or you're simply black students, children, but you're read as being loud, you're read as being noisy, and CCTV proves otherwise, but then there is no apology, no acknowledgement. Through all these acts, what I get from this is you don't belong. You don't deserve to be treated, we don't deserve to be treated as quote unquote humans.
There is this prevailing idea, and we've seen it time after time again, that black is bad and that black is loud and that black is just radical and tearing everything down, all the structures, the systems. And while I have never been a fan of respectability politics, while I've never ever been a fan of respectableness and presenting myself as respectable, because we see that respectableness has never saved